Hello and welcome to your first Latin podcast or screencast. My name is Sean Lake. I've had the script that I'll be reading from on the left-hand side here. You can see it. And you don't have to read along with that, but it might help to have it as a reference for later if you rewatch this. I said starting out with Latin is difficult, and the Latin Via Ovid book throws a lot of information at you in the first chapter. I'll start with about 3 or 4 points that I think are key to understanding Latin, and then I'll go over the points that the textbook presents in the order that they present them and give some additional explanation and examples. My first point is that in Latin, the verb is the most important word. In fact, the Latin word verbum does mean word. So in Latin, the word is the most important word, and in order to succeed in this course, you have to learn not to read from left to right as in English. You must learn to identify the verb first, and the reason that can be kind of tricky is that in Latin, the verb often comes at the end of the sentence. Look, for example, at the sentence the textbook provides. Puella in Phoenicia habitat. The verb is found at the end of the sentence. If you read this from left to right, you'd come up with a funny translation. The girl, Puella, in Phoenicia lives. The girl in Phoenicia lives is not the kind of translation I would like you to make in this class. I'd like you to make it sound like regular English, like real English, the English you would speak. So a better translation has to rearrange the word order that the Latin is presented in, and it would say something like, the girl lives in Phoenicia. But my first point is that the most crucial thing, once we get into complicated sentences in Latin, is that you find the verb, and that the verb will often, though not exclusively, be at the end of the sentence. That's my first major point. The verb is found at the end of the sentence, usually but not always. A major exception to this is the verb to be. The verb to be is placed really anywhere in the sentence. You'll even find instances in which the verb to be is omitted completely from the sentence. So be aware of that point. The verb to be is, are, am, all the forms of the verb to be. The verb is, are, I am, you are. That can be placed almost anywhere. Another important point to remember about the verb is that in poetry, or in sophisticated works of literature, which we won't really deal with this semester, the author is free to put the verb almost wherever he wants. In general, the tendency will still be, though, for the verb to be positioned at the end of the sentence, even in complicated, advanced Latin sentences. That tendency remains, but it is not a requirement. My second major point is about the verb ending or the verb suffixes. The important thing about a verb is that it's found at the end of the sentence often, and the ending of the verb itself is important. In Latin, you have verbal stems, which I will refer to generally as the theme. I'll be very consistent about that terminology. In Latin, you have a verbal stem or theme to which you add suffixes. For example, the verb love looks like this: amo, amas, amat, amamis, amatus, and amant. That's in the present tense. This is I love, you love, he, she, or it loves, we love, you, plural, love, and they love. So each of these different suffixes are added onto the theme, and that's what's important as far as understanding what the verb actually translates as. It's the end of the verb that tells you how to translate that verb. In English, there's much less changes to the end. As you can see, I love is spelled the same as you love. He loves in English adds an S. Sorry, you can't see that full word right there. But then we love looks the same as you all love looks the same as I, and we and they love looks exactly the same. You don't add that many endings onto English verbs or suffixes, but in Latin, the suffixes that you end are crucial to your understanding. So my second major point here is that the ending or suffix, you call that, the suffix of a verb that you add to its theme is crucial to translating it properly. Look at the examples that I have from the textbook. You can see, for example, in the sentence that says, infinicio habitat, this one right here, infinicio habito, that means I live in Phoenicia. The second one has a different suffix, habitas, that means you live in Phoenicia. The third one has yet another suffix, the T. It says he, she, or it lives in Phoenicia. Note that in that final example, there is some ambiguity. The last one says, in Phoenicia habitat. It could be she lives, or he lives, or it lives. So in that case, it would be helpful to have a noun. But what you have to realize about Latin is that the personal endings or suffixes at the end of a verbal theme generally explain who the person is. So the personal pronoun is not necessary in Latin. Sometimes you still use a personal pronoun in Latin, like I, or you, or he, she, and it. That's an example of a personal pronoun, but it's not necessary in Latin. The endings alone on a verb generally indicate who the person is that is doing the action. My third point is that the verb shows that the word order of Latin is not the same as in English, and that the suffix that's added to the end of the verb is the most important part of the verb. The same is true for nouns, pronouns, and adjectives. The word order of these words in Latin sentences is much more flexible than it is in English sentences, because unlike English, word order does not indicate the meaning. You must learn to look at the endings or suffixes not only for verbs, but also for nouns, pronouns, and adjectives. Just as with verbs, in the case of nouns, it's the suffixes that are attached to each noun, adjective, or pronoun that indicate how the word functions in a sentence. Take a look at these examples in English. If you have a sentence in English where it says, the girl loves the boy, that's different in meaning from the boy loves the girl. Word order indicates who does the loving and who receives the loving in English. But in Latin, word order does not indicate meaning. The suffixes at the end of a noun, adjective, or pronoun indicate how a noun functions. For example, this sentence right here, puella amat puerum, says the girl loves the boy. So does the sentence below it, puerum amat puella. The word order has been changed, but the meaning is the same. The meaning is the same. You can tell that the meaning is the same because note that puella here in the first sentence ends with an A, and puella here also ends with an A. The next example is the same thing. Puella ends with an A, so it means the same thing. It's the word endings in Latin, both for verbs and for nouns, adjectives, and pronouns, that indicate how they function in a sentence. So you've got to learn to be in the habit of not reading an English word order, but analyzing the endings of verbs, nouns, adjectives, and pronouns. Each of these sentences says that the girl loves the boy, even though they're in a different word order. The reason you can tell is because in every single instance, puella ends with an A. That means it's the subject of the sentence. And puerum ends with an M. That means it receives the action. That's called the direct object. Look at the next set of examples. Puer amat puellam. Note that the ending of puer has changed. Now it does not end with a as in the previous examples. It just ends with an r. That means in this case that is the subject. And note that puellam now ends with an m. That means it is now the direct object receiving the action. Therefore, this sentence says the boy loves the girl. And so does the next sentence. The boy, because it ends with an r, loves, there's the verb, the girl. Because it ends with an m, you know she's the one that receives the love. The same is true for this example, puellam amat puer. The boy loves the girl. And this final example, puellam puer amat. It says the boy loves the girl. You can essentially jumble up the words and they mean the same thing in Latin. Latin doesn't tend to just put them in random order. You'll notice the patterns as you learn more Latin. Don't be overwhelmed at this point. But the gist is, if you don't learn to look at the endings of the nouns and the verbs, you won't be able to make sense of the sentences. My fourth major point is that the suffixes or endings that you add to nouns, pronouns and adjectives, are called case endings. And the process of adding them to a noun is called declension. The suffixes on verbs are called personal endings or personal suffixes, and the process of adding them to a verb is called conjugation. I showed you an example of conjugation earlier. I showed you the verb amo, and I added different endings so that they translated differently, and this is called conjugation. That's what you do to verbs when you add the different endings to them. Note that each of these has a different ending, so it has a different meaning. The first one means I love. The second one means you love. The third one is he, she, or it loves. Then we love, you all love, and they love. That process is called conjugation. When you add different endings onto nouns, the process is called declension. Before I move on to the next points, which are the points taken from the book, I want to remind you this might be a good time to take a break. It's already been about 12 minutes for this. I don't know how tiresome it is to listen to or watch this podcast like that. It's not a lot going on the screen, but you can pause it and rewind it and listen to it again, and I suggest that you do that. And again, at this point, it might be a good time to take a break from this, maybe look at the book and the examples. I will be moving on next to the points in the book, starting with number 1. The first point that the book makes, it calls structure. It says in Latin, there is not a word for the or a. You can supply whichever word you think sounds best. They give the example, hic est puella. That sentence can be translated as here, hic, est is, puella, girl. You can translate it as either here is the girl or here is a girl. Either one is perfectly valid. Latin does not designate the or a under any circumstances, really. You have to make that decision and make it sound natural, make it sound like good English. Sometimes the will be more appropriate, sometimes and sometimes it'll be completely up to you. The next point is about word order. The book points out that usually the adjective follows a noun. That's unlike English. In Latin, if you would translate this literally word for word into English, it would say hic, here, est, is, puella, the girl, small. So it would say, here is girl, small. That does not sound like good English. Please do not translate that in this class. That should be translated as something like, here is the small girl, or here is a small girl. So you have to supply both the or a, and you have to rearrange the word order so that parwa, the adjective small, comes before the word girl, as is natural in English. Here is the small girl. Third point in the textbook is that Latin verbs do not need to use the personal pronouns. This is something I've mentioned to you before. The personal pronouns are the words in English I, you, he, she, or it, which I neglected to type here, he, she, or it, we, you, and they. Latin does not need to use the personal suffixes because the ending of the verb tells you who is doing the action. For example, in this sentence, in this verb, in these examples of these verbs, regnat means he, she, or it rules. Regno, the second one, means I rule. And the third one, regnas, means you rule. It is only because of the endings that I can tell them apart. Whereas in English, remember, it would just be I rule, you rule. The way you can tell them apart in English is mostly because of the personal pronoun. But in Latin, they don't write the personal pronoun, and instead, you have to rely on the ending of the verb, which English doesn't really bother with. These two English words, rule and rule, have the same exact ending, whereas in Latin, it's the ending that distinguishes them from one another. The fourth point in the textbook is that the suffixes, that's the word that goes, that's a part of the word that goes on the end of another word, or the stem or theme. The suffixes on a noun indicate how nouns function in a sentence. For example, I've already made this point, whether a noun is the subject or the direct object of the sentence is indicated by its ending, just like a verb. And whether or not nouns are singular or plural are also indicated by their ending. The example given in the book, or one of the examples given in the book, is puellae, and that has a different ending than other examples you'll see in the next slide, and that's how you can tell whether they're singular or plural, whether they're the subject or the direct object of the sentence, and also what their gender is. So the endings of nouns tell you the function of the sentence, function of the word in the sentence, whether they're singular or plural, and what their gender is. That's 3 pieces of information. How they function, whether they're singular or plural, and finally, what their gender is. The little ending on the noun tells you all 3 pieces of information. Take a look at these examples. Puella ends with an A, and so you can tell that puella is the subject of the sentence. You can tell that it is singular, and you can tell that it is feminine, all from that letter A. All that information is conveyed by the suffix of that noun. Down here, you have puellam. That tells you that it's the direct object of the sentence. It receives the action. That's what a direct object does. The subject does the action. The direct object receives the action. You can tell that am is singular, and you can tell that am is feminine. Everything in Latin has a function in the sentence, a number, singular or plural, and a gender. And then you see the example here, puer. You can tell that puer is a subject of the sentence. You can tell that it is singular in number, and you can tell that it is masculine in gender. Puerum, on the other hand, since it ends in um rather than just r, is a direct object, receives the action of a sentence, it is singular, and it is masculine. Terrae, you can tell, is a subject, plural, and feminine. Pueri is a subject, plural, and masculine. Pueros is a direct object, plural, and masculine. Don't be overwhelmed by this information yet. You'll learn very quickly to memorize these endings and how they function in a sentence. Remember what I said in the beginning of this podcast? This is all very overwhelming if you have never studied Latin before, or if you haven't learned much grammar before. but it will not continue to be overwhelming. All of these terms and jargon and endings will become second nature to you very quickly. Point number 5 in the book is that the different case endings or suffixes that you add to the end of a noun each have a name. So far, the book introduces the names for the subject ending, which is called nominative. So all of the examples above that I indicated were subjects of the sentence, that's in the nominative case ending. This is in the nominative case ending, puer. Terai is the subject, even though it's plural, it's still the nominative case ending, it's just the nominative plural case ending. Puerai is the subject plural again. It's a nominative case ending. And when you have the direct object case ending, that's called the accusative case. So all the words up here that I pointed out were in the direct object of the sentence, like pueros, that's called the accusative case ending, os in this case. Or you can have this singular accusative ending for puellam. Puerum is another singular accusative case ending. Right now, you do not need to memorize these endings. You just need to start to become familiar with the terms nominative and accusative. You don't need to memorize anything yet, but you do need to start becoming familiar with these terms so that I can use them regularly, and your textbook will use them regularly, and you will understand how to apply them. I say that most nouns, pronouns, and adjectives, the next case ending that the book introduces, most nouns, pronouns, and adjectives that are the object of a preposition. That's different than being the direct object. Most nouns, pronouns, and adjectives that are the object of a preposition, and then I define for you what a preposition is. A preposition is a word that indicates location in space or time, like around, above, after, before, behind, over, under. For example, the paper was under the desk. Or, for example, I arrived after him. Or the event was before the evening. Or I was behind the house. Any word that follows, or most nouns, I should say, most nouns, pronouns, and adjectives that follow a preposition are in the so-called ablative case. So you've got 3 case endings so far that are indicated by the endings or suffixes that go on the end of a noun. They're the nominative case ending, they're the accusative case ending, and they're the ablative case ending. 3 case endings so far. There are going to be more in this class. Sorry, 2 goes right there, and 3 down here. There's going to be more case endings in this class, but so far the book wants you to be aware of the nominative for the subject, the accusative for the direct object, and the ablative case ending for the object of a preposition. Object of a preposition is the noun that follows a word that indicates location in space or time, like around, above, about, before, behind, over, under, near, etc. The 6th point in the textbook is that there are 5 different classes of noun. This is to say there's like 5 different categories of nouns that you'll be studying. The first class or category of noun that you'll learn is called the first declension. Here is what the case endings that you know so far look like. Puella is the nominative, singular, and feminine. That means this word is the subject of the sentence because it has the nominative case ending and it happens to be singular and feminine. Puellam is the direct object case ending in the singular and feminine. So that's the accusative singular feminine. And then puella, which has to have a long mark over the A to distinguish it from the nominative. This is what it would look like in your textbook with a long mark over the A. That's different from the puella, the first example, which does not have the long mark over the A, and their pronunciation is different as well. That's what the long mark represents. Puella is the ablative singular feminine. So again, puella is the nominative singular feminine. Puellam is the accusative singular feminine. And puella, sorry, I pronounced it wrong myself, puella is the ablative singular feminine. Then you move on to the plural. Puellae is the nominative plural feminine. Puellas is the accusative plural feminine. And puellis is the ablative plural feminine. If I can abbreviate, this is the nominative on the top, singular on the left, plural on the right. Puellam is the accusative, singular on the left, plural on the right. Sorry for my C there. And then puella is the ablative, singular on the left, plural on the right. Nominative, accusative, and ablative. Those are the only three case endings you know so far. There will be more to come. Again, you don't have to memorize these endings yet, and you don't have to exactly memorize the names yet, but you need to start becoming familiar with them because they will be used on a regular basis. The benefit of doing this class online is that you can rewatch these podcasts, you can read the book after watching the podcast and help clarify the ideas, and you can, of course, Skype me at SEANELAKE, Sean E. Lake, if you have questions about that after watching the screencast and after reading the book. The seventh point that the textbook makes in Chapter 1 is that sometimes when using the word is or are, or any form of the verb to be, at the beginning of a sentence, Latin can omit the word there, as in there is or there are. Look at the example. Sunt terrae in Europa. That sentence says there are lands in Europe, or there are countries in Europe. But it does not use the word, technically, it does not use the word in Latin for there. It really just says are lands in Europe. But again, that's bad English. So sometimes the point of number 7 is that you have to supply the word there. The second example says, est insula in Phoenicia. That says there is an island in Phoenicia. Literally, though, I ran out of room, but literally it says, is an island in Phoenicia. You have to supply the word there when you translate it to make it sound like good English. The 8th major point of the book is that as in English, there are words that signal questions. For example, the word ubi means where, as in where is the island. The book also points out that you can add the suffix ne to the end of the first word in any sentence to make it into a question. For example, sunt ne insulae magnae. The word sunt has had added to it the ne suffix, which is like asking a question to the Latin ear. It sounds now like a question. It says, sunt ne insulae magnae. It says, are there big islands? If you would get rid of the ne, it would just say, as we saw in the other example, if you'd get rid of the ne, it would no longer be a question. It would just say, there are big islands. So note in this example, the adjective comes after the noun. The noun is islands, insulae. The adjective is magnae. And in this case, you can either make it into simple sentence and supply the word there are big islands, or if you add nay, then you can make it into a question. The book points out next that positive answers to questions in Latin often use the word ita, I-T-A. Although this doesn't literally mean yes, it essentially means yes in practice. I will certainly accept in your translations yes for the word ita. So, for example, ita sunt magnae. A good translation of that sentence is yes, they are big. And note again that the word they does not need to be in the sentence because they is supplied by the suffix of the verb. Another point about questions is that negative answers use the word non placed before the verb. So in this example, it says insulae non sunt parvae. It says the islands, insulae, not are small. Of course, that's an awkward English translation. You would translate that more like the islands are not small. The non goes before the verb that it is negating. Number 8 is a term of jargon, but it's a useful one. The term apposition is used to describe a noun that describes another noun. So the term apposition is used to describe a noun that describes another noun. Sorry that the pages were cut off there. Usually, you probably know that it's adjectives that describe nouns, but a noun in apposition to another noun can also describe a noun. These nouns that describe one another are usually positioned next to one another. That's where the word apposition comes from. Apposition means it's placed next to. So in the example, est fabula de puella Europa, the sentence translates as, there is est, note that I had to supply there is fabula, a story, note that I had to supply a, de puella, about a girl, that's in the ablative, so I can't type the long mark, but I can write it in here. Est fabula de puella Europa. There is a story about a girl, Europa. Puella and Europa are in apposition to one another. They stand next to one another. And Europa essentially explains or describes Puella. There's a story about a girl, Europa. Same thing in the next example. Terra Italia est in Europe. It says the land Italy is in Europe. It's a little bit awkward of a translation, but I'm trying to point out the apposition. The land, by which I mean Italy, is in Europe. Terra is a noun and Italia is a noun. The two nouns are positioned next to each other, which is called apposition. And that means that the one noun essentially describes the other noun. There's a land, which we call Italy, and it is in Europe. Terra and Italia more or less function as noun and adjective to one another. The land, Italy, is in Europe. That's the conclusion of the first podcast. I hope it is at a right pace for you. It is long, but the chapters are long, so I do recommend that you break these up maybe into pieces. I'll do the same thing every time. I'll give you a small presentation in the beginning that is a useful summary of the skills that you need to work on, and then the second half of the podcast will go over point by point the examples in the book. I strongly recommend that you read the book along with the podcast so that you can follow along, look at the examples, pause the podcast, read what the book has to say, listen to the podcast again, do it a couple of times, and then contact me best during my virtual office hours on Skype, or email me with the time that you would like to talk to me on Skype. It would be very difficult for me to continually try to explain grammar questions or complicated questions about translation through email. So it's really best that we talk person to person. You don't have to turn your camera on when we Skype, but it'd be much easier for me to be able to type live to you, which I can do on Skype, and speak to you so I can actually answer your questions live. Thanks for listening, and I welcome your constructive, positive feedback for this method. I'm learning this particular app, Explain Everything, as I do it, so I apologize if my writing is sometimes a little bit sloppy in the beginning, or if it doesn't go as smoothly as it could. I'll get better and better at it, and I look forward to our second lesson.